The original Powerpuff Girls were one of the big reasons for the rise of Cartoon Network during the late 90s, and there's a brand new cartoon to revitalize the show, but it's been met with speculation and negativity. Video games that went along with the original show were pretty mediocre at best, and just usually flat out bad. But what about the new show? There's a brand new video game to go along with it called Flipped Out. But does this game have the ingredients to make the perfect video game, or is it just a bad experiment?
Sugar, spice, and everything nice. These were the ingredients.
In Powerpuff Girls Flipped Out, you have two different distinct styles of gameplay, sugar and spice modes. Don't worry, everything nice also makes an appearance, so you have everything that's needed to make the perfect little girls, but in sugar mode, it's much more of a puzzle style of gameplay, whereas in spice mode, it is much more action-based. And what's great is you can actually flip between the two gameplays, literally, at any point. You just flip your phone and you go from the sugar to the spice mode. There's a couple of little times where you're forced to use one or the other types of mode, either during tutorial or a particular boss fight, but for the most part, at any point you want, you can flip the game and actually change the style of play. In both modes, you have control of all three Powerpuff Girls at all times, but in sugar mode, it's a little bit more slow paced since it is a puzzle style. Your goal is to move the Powerpuff Girls around the grid, and each square on the level is a different spot for you to be at, but you have to move the Powerpuff Girl in a line, so once you move down or up or diagonal one of the ways, they will keep going until they run into a corner or run into an enemy or another object. When they collide with an enemy or object, they can then launch most objects in the game, or enemies, into other objects and enemies, or just anywhere else on the map that you want them to, and if you're able to line up 3 enemies at once, you defeat them. Lining up more will grant you bonus points, and your goal is to try to clear as many of the enemies possible as you can. Since sugar mode is more turn-based, you have a set number of turns per level, and your goal is really to just rack up how much of a high score as you possibly can without, of course, losing the lives of all 3 of the Powerpuff Girls simultaneously. Each one has their own health bar that you have to worry about, and after a turn or two of moving the Powerpuff Girls around, the enemies will also move and thus also attack. There's a decent variety of enemies throughout the game. It's the same ones in both styles of play, and they have different moves that they'll be doing against you. Some just in a normal straight melee attack, and other ones will do more elemental things, like freeze the area around them, causing the Powerpuff Girl to become frozen without being able to actually unfreeze them until they either take damage or you actually flip the gameplay. If any point all 3 Powerpuff Girls go down, it is game over and you have to start the level all over again, but if only 1 or 2 Powerpuff Girls are down, you can actually flip and change the gameplay mode from sugar to spice, or spice to sugar, and you will actually revive the Powerpuff Girls with 1 health only, but there are plenty of ways to get more health, either from finding health drops that will appear on the levels themselves, but also you can get stickers that you can earn that will also be able to heal you, like a healing spell. In Spice mode, it is action-based, so things don't come to a crawl at any point. You have to keep an eye on all 3 of the Powerpuff Girls. You can move them and attack all the same enemy if you want, or have them all attacking individual different enemies. You'll have to quickly press the button and actually move each of the Powerpuff Girls where you want them to. You can either slide, using your finger to just slide them across to different areas, just like you'll be doing in the Sugar mode, or you can click a Powerpuff Girl and then click an enemy or click an area that you want them to travel to. Once the action gets fast and furious, though, you're going to be pressing the buttons quite a lot, just mashing your touchscreen in order to try to get the Powerpuff Girls to go where you want to. And the action, like I said, is pretty fast and can get chaotic very quickly. Thankfully, combat in the game is automated. You move a Powerpuff Girl to an enemy, they just keep attacking it until it's defeated or until the Powerpuff Girl is defeated. You have to keep an eye out, though. Once one Powerpuff Girl defeats an enemy, she won't attack another one automatically unless it kind of gets directly into her line of sight. So you'll have to quickly press her and then move her to where you want to in order to either attack another enemy or maybe gather one of the various items that's scattered amongst the map after defeating enemies or opening up random crates that end up appearing on the map. Random items that end up dropping include health as well as pickle chips. The pickles will then rack up at the end of a level, depending upon how much combo and points you got, along with how many pickles you ended up collecting. And if you fill up the pickle meter, you'll get a gift from the mayor. You'll get to pick from one of the 3 different presents that will float on down, and you'll usually be rewarded with a sticker from one of these. You'll then use the stickers to upgrade your Powerpuff Girls. Basically, each of them have like a Trapper Keeper type thing, and you plop the stickers down on there. You can only have one distinct sticker for sugar and spice mode on each Powerpuff Girl at a time, but stuff like ability upgrades such as more health, you can pop on to your heart's content until it ends up filling up the particular Trapper Keeper of that particular Powerpuff Girl. These individual stickers that you end up getting are timed based. You'll use one by pressing it in the upper right corner depending upon what mode you have. So you'll have one for sugar mode and one for spice mode for each of the girls, and they do different things like either healing the Powerpuff Girls, charging them up to give them more attack for a period of time, or things like eye lasers in order to blast any enemy that's currently in their way. But they are usually very different from one another in both sugar and spice mode because of course the different styles of play, and they definitely come in handy, so you're going to want to mix and match them to get the best ones possible. Other stuff that you'll find laying on the random levels that will appear from time to time will also be the everything nice items. Basically, each Powerpuff Girl has certain type of items they like. You collect them and it fills up the everything nice meter at the bottom, and once that fills up, you flip your phone and you do like an ultimate attack that ends up clearing pretty much everything off the screen that's currently trying to bother you. There is a small bit of story that's done in the opening cutscene. It's pretty well animated, just like it would be on the cartoon show itself. Having the professor bring the Powerpuff Girls a new pet, they overfeed it, it becomes a giant monster and starts destroying Townsville. Pretty standard Powerpuff Girls plot, and your goal throughout is fighting all the various different creatures that basically spawn from this giant monster. You also have to deal with another show favorite, Mojo Jojo, from time to time as one of the other bosses, but unfortunately not a lot of the other characters end up making any kind of appearance during the course of the game. In the game, you have 4 different areas, each featuring 9 main levels and then a boss fight at the end, and they also each have 3 unlockable levels, so a total of 13 stages for each of the 4 areas. Unfortunately, it won't take you too long in order to battle your way through most of the levels. Depending upon which mode you prefer or play a lot more of, it may take you a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. Overall difficulty will also depend on how well you're able to comprehend the mechanics of the puzzle and just how good you are being attentive to get through the action portions. Unfortunately, you can't just play one mode or just the other mode. You will have to switch from time to time, including some enemies that can only be affected in one mode over the other one, so you do have to be at least a little bit fluent in each of the different modes so that you'll be able to conquer the game. After beating the level, not only do you rack up your pickle meter, you're also going to get a high score, and you need to reach a certain number of points in order to get the A+ rating, and getting a certain number of A+ will unlock those special bonus levels. As you make it a little bit farther into the game, things will change up a bit, adding hazards to the levels themselves besides just all the enemies that you're going to have to be fighting. You'll have stuff like spikes that will pop out, and the enemies can be hurt as well as you can be hurt if you end up running into them, and that's for both sugar and spice mode. And the same goes for when you make it to the final area of the laboratory and have to deal with electrical currents that end up running through. You're able to disable them by attacking the devices that are causing them, but they're still very easy to run into. I did run into some problems though also when I was trying to control multiple Powerpuff Girls at the same time during the spice mode, of having them get stuck behind the various objects like either drums or the electrical devices, and not being able to get around them without me really kind of pressing them and making sure they move absolutely around it in order to get back into the combat. The bosses in the game were a bit of a letdown. They started off kind of strong, but then you end up repeating the bosses as you made it farther into the game, which just ended up being a bit of a disappointment, as I wanted more characters or enemies from the show to make some sort of appearance throughout the course of the game. But the boss fights that were there, especially Mojo Jojo, was pretty enjoyable, as he forces you to have to deal with the flipped or not flipped versions of gameplay, and you have to be pretty good at both in order to take him down. Speaking of the bosses though, I did run into a problem with the second Mojo fight where he ended up glitching out at me. You have to do the sugar mode first and then you'll go into the spice mode, and when it did that he just froze and just stood there and allowed me just to beat on him until he ended up being defeated and never actually ended up attacking me. So I don't know if this is a common glitch that happens, but it was a bit disappointing and just made the boss fight an absolute breeze to me once I made it to it. I ended up redoing the boss fight and he actually worked the second time around, so I'm not sure exactly what ended up happening there. The game is available on both iOS and on Android, and it is $2.99. Unfortunately, it's not one of the free games like a lot of the other Cartoon Network-oriented games. But because of this, it doesn't bombard you by any means with microtransactions, so you're not going to have to worry about that whatsoever if you decide to end up purchasing the game. It's also a little bit more expensive than some other mobile games that may be available, but for the level of detail and the overall gameplay, honestly, for $3, it really isn't all that bad, especially if you're going to be going for those high scores to try to unlock those special levels. In the end, I did enjoy the game, even though I did run into a handful of problems, especially in the later levels, and I feel like if the bosses and a few more characters had made an appearance, I would have loved the game even more. So in the end, though, I'm going to be giving Powerpuff Girls Flipped Out a 4 out of 5. And that will wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.